You bump into her at Westway Cross, and the two of you decide to go for a coffee. How long is it since you last spoke? What, 4 years? And yet the conversation flows so well. It's like you've never been apart. At the end, you just make a date to meet again. You're so glad to be back in touch. And in the back of your mind, you remember why you haven't spoken for so long. She did something that upset you. You moaned about it to a few friends, but you were embarrassed about raising it with her, so you just didn't say anything, and eventually the contact fell apart. And looking back, 4 years later, it seems such a trivial, stupid thing to have fallen out about. But now you started speaking again. Now you've regained a friend, regained a sister. Our gospel reading today is about how to live happily and wisely in community. We haven't got the best translation here. The best translation would say, if your brother or sister transgresses against you, go and point out the issue when it is just the two of you. And then talks later about regaining a brother, regaining a sister. The language of family. Now, I'm sure that most of us have sometimes come across the occasional finger-wagging Christian who loves to tell people exactly what they're doing wrong. And sadly, such Christians often take this passage out of context. They put headings above it like church discipline. But let's look at where this passage comes in Matthew's Gospel. Immediately before it is the parable of the lost sheep. Immediately after it is Jesus telling Peter how often he ought to forgive. Immediately before it, the parable in which Jesus, or rather the shepherd, leaves 99 comfortable sheep in order to go out and find the one lamb that's got lost and bring it home. Immediately afterwards, Peter asks how many times he should forgive that annoying person in church who's upset him. He tries to be generous. 7 times? No, says Jesus, and gives the utterly ridiculous, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 times. This passage about how we deal with conflict in today's gospel is sandwiched between 2 passages on forgiveness. And the key lines in this are about how we regain a brother, how we regain a sister. Robert Louis Stevenson, in one of his novels, talks about 2 sisters who lived together in a house, and at some point they had a falling out. So they got a piece of chalk and they drew down the centre of the house, literally down the middle of everything, the middle of the sofa, the middle of the kitchen, the middle of the floor in each room. And with a chalk line, they divided the house in 2. And for the rest of their lives, they lived either side of the chalk line, never going into the other person's territory, never even acknowledging the existence of their sister. And the point of this little story by Robert Louis Stevenson is that we may not do it with literal pieces of chalk, but many of us sadly draw chalk lines between our brothers and sisters, cutting ourselves off from them. But Ephesians 2:14 tells us that Jesus comes to break down the dividing wall of hostility through his death on the cross. In the context of Ephesians, it's referring to the dividing wall of hostility that existed between Jew and Gentile in the first century. But I think it also applies to every dividing wall of hostility that human beings put up between ourselves. Jesus comes to break those walls down. And Jesus gives us 3 pieces of advice. Firstly, don't go above someone's head. If you're angry with someone, don't go and report it to the authorities. Now, obviously, there are cases where someone is in danger, such as child abuse, where the important thing might be to go to the police. But a pretty simple rule of thumb is, if it's not a matter for getting the police involved, don't go above someone's head. The coward's way is to make a complaint to someone's boss. Father Mund, I don't like the way Julie and Carolyn are running Sunday school. Have you spoken to Julie and Carolyn about this? No, but I'm speaking to you. Have you spoken to Julie and Carolyn about this? Now, just to make clear, there is no one who said that to me about Julie and Carolyn. But the point is, it's so easy, so tempting to avoid the difficult conversation. But actually, Jesus' advice is stark. If your brother or sister transgresses against you, upsets you, go and speak to them while the 2 of you are alone. A second corollary of this is, don't go above people's back. Don't moan about people behind their backs. Whether you go to their boss or go to the crowds, it's still avoiding having the one-on-one conversation where you actually thrash out the issue alone. Deal with it and regain a brother or sister. The first stage is to talk alone. Only if that fails are we to bring in a wise second or third person to mediate and witness a conversation. And only if that and everything else fails are we to go to the church structures, or if you're in a workplace, to go to your boss, or however it might be. And the third lesson from Jesus: sort it out now. There is a important thing in management theory and human resources known as the rule of no surprises. When a manager is behaving properly, if you go into your performance review with them, you won't be surprised by anything that's said. If there are things that aren't going well, they will have raised them with you during the year already. If there are things that are going well, they'll have praised you during the year for it. There should be no surprises in a performance review. Never catch people out off guard. It doesn't create good morale to do that. In the same way, Jesus tells us to go and talk to your brother and sister. Not wait until the issues mount up and become insurmountable, but go and talk. You know how it can be like at work. You go into that performance review and your boss lists this thing that you didn't like that you did, and then lists 30 other occasions that you did it. And you want to say to him, but if you'd mentioned on the first time that you didn't like this, I'd have changed and I wouldn't have done it. very easy for things to get out of control if we don't focus on thrashing out the issues and healing the relationships. Because the point is to regain a sister or a brother. If your brother and sister transgresses against you, go and point out the issue when the two of you are alone. They may well explain what they did, and it may now make sense to you. Or you may explain to them why you have a problem with it, and they might now take that on board and change their behaviour. Or it may be that while you're sitting there having that cup of coffee, even though on this one issue you just can't agree, you realise you have so much else in common that really it's not that important after all. It's not worth losing a friend over, not worth losing a brother or sister over. Remember, this passage is sandwiched between the lost lamb and Jesus' teaching to Peter on forgiveness. An old man who was dying summoned his children to his bedside, and he asked them to bring a bundle of sticks. So they brought a bundle of sticks, and he asked one of his children to take the bundle of sticks and to break it. And the boy tried really hard, but he just couldn't break the bundle of sticks. He passed it to his sister. She couldn't break the bundle of sticks, and so it went round all the children, and none of them could break it. Then the old man said, "Take one stick out." Stick apart from the bundle, and the stick on its own the child took and easily snapped in two. When we allow things to fester, we become like scattered sticks, and we are easily broken. But when as a church we heal our relationships, talk things through one to one, then we become united, and then we are strong. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am. In the context of this passage, Jesus is not promising to be with us when we are a bitchy, divided bunch who don't talk to one another and hold grudges and nurse them. No, Jesus is promising to be with us when we are gathered in his name, in heart and mind and soul. At the moment during coronavirus, we may not all be physically gathered in one place. Some are gathering in the physical church, some are gathering on Zoom, some are gathering over telephone calls. But what's important is what's happening in our heart. When we are united in heart and mind, gathered there, then Jesus says he is there among us. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. And then he says, if 2 of you agree about anything in my name, it will be done for you. I.e., if we want God to listen to us, we need to listen to each other. If we want our prayer to be powerful, we need to let our neighbour's voice be powerful too. But if we are like scattered sticks taken out of the bundle, then we will be weak and divided. Jesus' teaching of forgiveness will go on to say that if we No, with the parable of the unforgiving servant, that if we don't forgive others, how can we expect to be forgiven? This passage, as I said, has often been referred to as by finger-wagging Christians as a passage on church discipline. But as the Baptist pastor Ross Cochrane puts it, Jesus is not giving us a pattern for church discipline, as many call it, but a pattern for returning harmony and agreement to discordant relationships. And he is here in the midst of us when that happens. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.